Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of FSMA Friday. We will be getting started in about 2 minutes. We have a lot of content to get through, so we will be starting pretty quickly. Uh, Stay tuned. We'll be on in one more minute. Thank you. All right, welcome back. Um, I want to share, if we would go to the next slide, a little housekeeping items. What is FSMA Friday? Right? It's a monthly FSMA related news, regulations, changes, and updates. We like to go over that. We go over industry trends, and then we also have a Q&A with the Atchison Group. And this is brought to you by the Atchison Group and Safety Chain. Next slide. Before we get started, only the panelist mics are on. Ask questions. Please put them in the chat. We'll try to get to them at the end. Recording links will be shared. And then if you have audio issues, please use the call-in number. Now, I'm really excited about our next speaker. If you'll skip to the next slide, where they can also see this. I'm so excited to introduce Dr. Ruth Petran. She's a senior advisor, food safety for the Atchison Group, and also a principal and founder of Ruth Petran Consulting. She's held leadership roles at Ecolab, Pillsbury, and General Mills. And Dr. Petran is a fellow and past president IAFP. She's also a certified food scientist and chairs Minnesota Food Safety and Defense Task Force. I'm super excited today to go over her topic of what can we learn from recent regulatory violations. And she's put together a jam-packed presentation today with lots of interesting facts and thoughts. And so welcome, Ruth.
Thank you, Nye. I am happy to be here. And you're right, there's a lot of facts and figures, but we'll get through them all.
All right, next slide. So just the agenda, high level, we'll go over the regulatory updates. Then she's going to go into top FDA citations and then recent recalls analysis and best practices. Next slide.
Terrific. So to kick off, what's been in the news related to food safety recently? Well, as always, there's always plenty of things going on, and the first of which is, we're glad that the funding was approved for the U.S. government, and there have been some comments out there relating to the impacts of some of these provisions that made it into those funding packages and the impact on food safety. I think in general, it's important to recognize that while there are some things that were mentioned, in general, it was more just the clarification of some positions that FDA, for example, was taking. Granting of certain exemptions that had been being considered for quite a while, codifying the fact that the industry compliance date for the traceability rule will be extended, confirming that further research is going to be needed related to Listeria monocytogenes, suggesting harmonization and the need for that across states and the like. So, I think some good things there, but it's more just kind of putting the bow on the package for many of those things that were in the works for a while. But a couple other things going on. We did hear a while back in the recent past that California has passed a law called the Allergen Disclosure for Dining Experiences Act. It will require chain restaurants with locations with greater than 20 uh, sites to disclose the top 9 major allergens on their menus, and that's effective July 1st of 2029. Sorry, 2026 coming up. So an example of a state law requiring that. And then in general, I think it's, and we'll see this as we go through some of this information to come, that enhanced there is an enhanced focus on enforcement across the board that should be considered and likely will have implications that at least need to be considered for all of you in the industry. Next slide, please. But to talk about that and some others, let's just jump into where we are. Next slide, please. And the big takeaway from this is that there's all kinds of sources of information. We're going to talk about some related to top identified violations, what the regulators' focuses seem to be. But really, the essence is that we need to be aware of this, and then we need to apply this information appropriately. Next slide, please. Because the reality is that many of these insights can and should drive compliance efforts by all of us in the industry. We will look at data from FDA on the top citations they're seeing. We will look at data from Europe. We will look at data that has been provided through industry audits. And then what are warning letters telling us? We'll look at these patterns in violations to understand what the regulatory focus is and think globally as well, because certainly we are a global food supply. Next slide, please. So let's dig into this. First of all, these are data that the FDA has published over the time frame of 2009 to now through fiscal 26, so 27 years of data. Granted high-level summary, and I think it's important to note is how many of these relate to essentially basic good manufacturing or GMP practices. If we just look at the pieces of the pie whose legends are highlighted in red font, these are those that fall into that GMP category. So things like facility, building and sanitary, building conditions and its sanitary nature, floors, walls, and ceilings, that the facility could be a source of contamination. Sanitation may not be monitored appropriately, or lack of effective pest exclusion. Very, very fundamental GMP kinds of concerns, yet they continually are cited by FDA. Let's go to the next slide, please. And even if we look at a subset of these data for just fiscal 25, again, using the same color coding in the red boxes, we see pest control, personnel, plant maintenance, the design and maintenance of equipment, and sanitation. Collectively, if we stacked all those red bars all up together, they would be the #1 source of citations. Now, the one on the left, the top bar, is the development of an FSVP or Foreign Supplier Verification Program, which is certainly very, very important and continues to be the sole #1 source of recent citations. But I think it's notable to not ignore the impact of lapses in GMPs leading to these citations. The yellow bar in there is improper identification of hazards in a hazard analysis. So again, further evidence of where attention needs to be paid to these kinds of issues. Next slide, please. We can look at the reportable food registry, which, as we all know, is this electronic portal into which industry can report when there's a reasonable probability that an article of food will cause serious adverse health consequences or death, so-called reportable foods. We do see that biological hazards, and that's the sum of the Salmonella and Listeria monocytogenes, um, categories are reported most frequently, but certainly undeclared allergens continue to represent around a third of reported hazards in foods. So other insights as to what or where our focus should be. Next slide, please. Um, we also can look at recent recalls and advisories that have been issued. And I bucketed these into four different categories, just straight contamination. Noting here recent issues, say, of salmonella contamination in cucumbers. In complaints or issues that have arisen from complaints, we've seen concerns around plastic material in sandwiches and some metal products in pork jerky. Often these relate to physical type hazard concerns. Then unexpected issues, we certainly need to keep our eyes open for those. The cesium 137 in shrimp resulted certainly in an advisory and seems to be linked, as best we have been advised, to in industrial contamination in the vicinity of shrimp farms in Indonesia. Good news is that these didn't enter U.S. commerce, but were tested. But still, it's not something that we would think about as a possible hazard in shrimp. But now we need to be considering that possibility anyway. And finally, illnesses. We do have illness outbreaks that occur, most notably salmonella in eggs and Shiga toxin E. coli in cheese products recently. Next slide, please. Warning letters can also give us some insights. These are data from a publication by FDA where they ranked or examined the types of violations they were seeing in warning letters. And that first bar on the left, the tallest one, guess what? It's back to GMP issues, leading the largest piece of reasons for warning letters. We see salmonella as the most frequently cited pathogen in these warning letters, and also gaps related to the foreign supplier verification as well. Next slide, please. I always have to look internationally as well. The European Rapid Alert System for Food and Feed, or RASIF, has been in existence for many, many years, and is a place where member companies in the European Union can summarize what issues are going on and to facilitate communication of these issues and that the appropriate reactions can be facilitated. Looking at these data through October of 2025, there's more than 4,000 total notifications in this system. The vast majority are related to food and not feed. And just some highlights of these, well, the top cause of notifications were due to issues with mycotoxin contamination. About 10% related to pesticide violations in fruits and vegetables with a Turkish origin. Fish products also hit the list, tuna being the most notified product for issues including things like mercury, histamine, and Listeria monocytogenes contamination. So again, kind of additional warning bells in a sense of what are things that are going on and which should we be concerned about. Next slide, please. Then we've got a great set of data, and I really applaud BRC for publicizing these data, giving us insights into what are being called out in the vast majority of inspections that BRC performs on an annual basis. Their report covering 2024 through 2025 covered 38,000 inspections done of facilities across the world. I think it's notable that about 12% of these inspections related to the premises and equipment within those facilities being maintained in clean and hygienic conditions. Sounds a lot like GMPs, again, from the previous data that we've looked at. We also saw about 9% of these related to equipment design and construction, and that they may not be done appropriately to prevent contamination. And then lastly, managing chemicals to prevent chemical contamination of food products. More evidence of these lapses in some of these basic foundational programs. Next slide, please. So we're all familiar with GMPs, and I don't need to go into this in a lot of detail, but I think it's just worth reminding ourselves that the GMPs are published in 21 CFR, Part B, Subpart B, and cover areas such as personnel and training, plants and equipment, covering many of those areas that we've seen violations in: sanitary facilities, equipment design, maintenance, those kinds of things. And then lastly, covering operations and controls, addressing that these sanitary operations, process control, warehousing standards, and so on are safe for food production. Next slide, please. Another source of insights is just where are the regulators focusing? Um, Looking to our friends in Canada, um, they have announced that they will be beefing up their enforcement. They intend to inspect 2,400 licensed food establishments over the year to come. They are going to embark in so-called risk intelligence, leveraging data where they can to help risk in their risk ranking and risk modeling, which they will extend to chemical hazards. They certainly will be focusing on communicating effectively with stakeholders, and then overall just strengthening their enforcement uh, activities. Next slide, please. We have granted, the specifics are different, but continued regulatory focus, of course, by the USDA Food Safety Inspection Service. They have stated they will be continuing to focus on salmonella control in poultry, targeting those highly pathogenic strains of salmonella. They, like Canada and many, many others around the world, will be leveraging modern testing technologies to make sure that they are targeting the most highly pathogenic strains. They will leverage and strengthen partnerships with states and, in general, empowering their inspectors to take stronger compliance actions when such actions are warranted. And FDA has issued what their focuses will be in the years to come. Not surprising, there will be focus on plant-based foods as these continue to become more and more prevalent within our food supply. Continued focused on low moisture, ready-to-eat foods, considering how sanitation might need to be improved in order, along with other practices, to prevent the contamination of pathogens. Certainly continued focus on infant formula. Chemical contaminants remain on the screen as well, focusing on food additives like colors, heavy metals, including lead. And then there's the whole world of ultra-processed foods, which we will see more action in communications about in the times to come. Next slide, please. So that was a lot of facts and figures, a lot to absorb. I want to ground us a little bit because this, may have always happened to the other guy, or it's what is stated in a big pronouncement from a regulatory agency or published in a document. But these things happen in the real world too. And I just have some pictures here that I think tell some of these stories. So the next slide, please. Considering what can happen in the external areas around a facility, things like roof leaks that could occur from standing water that's allowed to accumulate on a flat roof after a big rain event, unpaved parking areas, which certainly can lead to tracking in of debris and mud and dirt and all from those parking lots, vegetation around a food facility that is right up against the walls of that facility, and then certainly accumulated trash. All these are real instances. Next slide, please. The issues related to sanitation, the first picture on the upper left there is a picture of a floor very close to an entry point for product to go into an incline conveyor. The floor is in poor condition. Right below that is a pipe that was supposedly cleaned, yet had food residue left over. The middle shot is metal detector test wands that were, again, supposed to be cleaned. And then lastly, a picture of a brush there on the clean parts shelf, yet if you look carefully, there remains food debris in those bristles of the brush. Next slide, please. And then, the reality of physical hazards, including things like glass. Glass utensils still may be being used in a facility. How are they being managed is certainly key to hopefully avoid situations like the picture on the left with a gauge on a piece of equipment, with most of its glass or hard plastic covering shattered into likely many pieces. Where did that all go? Next slide, please. So I've shown you a lot, real world and what the regulators are seeing. Let's not ignore this information. Next slide, please. But instead, we need to apply this information. So with this kind of background, I would take this information to ask myself some of these questions. Where am I sourcing my foods from? Are they from overseas where there might be different sorts of environmental risks? Are there um, issues within that facility itself from a GMP standpoint that I need to be considering? Are there newly emerging hazards? What is the literature telling me? What am I seeing in some of these emerging issues or unexpected issues that all of a sudden we're starting to see more of? Are you making foods that perhaps were subject to a recall um, somewhere in the world? Do you need to take into account what the reasons for those recalls are, and are you controlling them effectively? Looking at what regulators are finding certainly gives us clues about what issues may be out there, but also as far as what the regulators are focusing on. And if we have that, that allows us to make sure that we are putting the right practices in place to avoid there being hazards in our particular facilities. And certainly we can't ignore um, potential hazards that could be related to good manufacturing practices, these basic foundational programs that should be in place, are required to be in place, yet we see continual lapses in many instances. Next slide. So with that as a backdrop and some things to think about, I just want to re-highlight guidance from FDA, which was published now almost 2 years ago as an update to information they had previously published. Because I think there's a lot in this document that is super helpful as far as identifying where focus needs to be. This is part of the FSMA guidance materials, and it's the infamous Appendix 1 that many of us are familiar with. But just let's look at a little bit of this. Next slide, please. Here's a screenshot of one of these tables that exists in this appendix related to inherent hazards that could occur in bakery items. There's quite an extensive list of different kinds of foods and different varieties of how certain items may be processed. Looking at this screenshot in particular, we see liquid batter, other pastry products, and tortillas among the many products that are listed in this bakery items chart. And across the top are listed various and typical biological hazards that could be found in food products. and then a quick way to reference which of those might be appropriate for consideration in the particular product of concern. And picking on tortillas down at the bottom, we see X is in the pathogenic E. coli, Salmonella, and Listeria um, categories. So again, a good place to start as far as what might be the hazards in these products. Next slide. The appendix also includes various tables for chemical hazards in certain kinds of food products. Here's a screenshot again of those chemical hazards in beverage products. And we see non-dairy cocoa and chocolate listed, coffee, tea, carbonated beverage, and ground coffee substitutes. Um, and the potential chemical hazards that might exist. I think it's notable that this list includes drug residues, heavy metals, including arsenic, cadmium, and lead, mycotoxins, and then pesticides as appropriate. And you'll note for non-dairy cocoa and chocolate, they have indicated at least consideration of heavy metals, including those three of the two of cadmium and lead, and then mycotoxins as well. So if you are sourcing one of these kinds of ingredients, that at least would give you a starting place for the inherent hazards for consideration. Next slide, please. But as those regulatory lists and all that I showed you previously illustrate, we have to go a lot further than just the particular inherent hazards that might be identified in these different food commodities. And Appendix 1 goes on to list some of these that might be related to the supplier's facility or your own manufacturing facility. And just to go through these, I know there's a lot of information on this slide, but in the biological hazard category, they have listed several of these. The first of which would be the consideration of the presence, growth, and toxin production after survival of a heat treatment. For example, Listeria monocytogenes in a milk product if it were not pasteurized appropriately. So checking the pasteurization process would certainly be a way to help ensure that Listeria monocytogenes would be controlled. The next one relates to pour, time, or temperature control, which can lead to growth and or toxin production in certain food products. And some examples might be Clostridium perfringens in a gravy product if it weren't cooled quickly enough, or Staph aureus survival and potential toxin formation and with growth in a batter if it were exposed to warm temperatures. We see issues due to poor formulation control that could allow growth and or toxin production, like an acidified food that is not acidified appropriately, which could allow growth of salmonella. And then reduced oxygen packaging, which could allow for growth or toxin production of relevant organisms, such as Clostridium botulinum in vacuum packaged pasta. Next slide, please. The biological hazards due to supplier and manufacturer processes continue with those which could be related to ingredients that might be added after a process control. For example, if cocoa might be applied to a baked cake as kind of a dusting to make it look a little fancy, how is the salmonella controlled in that cocoa from the supplier and then through the manufacturing process? Seasonings that might be added to a cracker after that cracker is baked, for example. We have issues that could be related to lack of container integrity that could result in presence growth or toxin production, such as a food that's pasteurized in a container, like a jar, and then submerged in cooling water. If obviously the container isn't intact, that water can leach into the food. Then we need to always think about the presence of environmental pathogens if there is exposure of a ready-to-eat food to a processing environment where there's potential for recontamination. We think here, for example, about Salmonella or Listeria monocytogenes in these kinds of situations. Next slide, please. Then we have the same approach for supplier or manufacturer chemical hazards that could originate from that process or those facilities. A lot around allergens due to incorrect labeling and resulting in undeclared allergens on a package, unintended food allergen presence due to cross contact, often due to sanitation concerns if there's residual allergen soil left on shared equipment. If we have misformulation such that a chemical ingredient is not added at the proper concentration, over addition of sulfites, for example, or putting sulfites into a product where it wasn't supposed to be there. Um, and then certain plant-based foods we know can result in process contaminants such as acrylamide in certain plant-based foods. Next slide, please. And then we have physical hazards that need to be considered. The guidance talks about metal, glass, and hard plastic, which can result from various parts of our manufacturing processes. Metal, if we have a chopping blade, for example, or metal on metal contact. Glass, if we are packaging in a glass container. And then hard plastic, certainly from equipment, guards, utensils, et cetera, and whatever sources might exist in the facility. So again, some other clues as to what are those things that we need to be concerned about as hazards to make sure that we are identifying them properly and then controlling them as well. I want to just highlight this with an example on the next slide. As far as what I might think about for possible hazard identification as I'm looking at this. So dry milk powder, we know from these tables in Appendix 1, and had we looked at this, we would have seen that Salmonella, pathogenic E. coli, and Listeria monocytogenes would be identified as those inherent hazards, often or which can be associated with improperly processed milk powder, for example. But then we need to go beyond this and look at the supplier and the particular hazards that might be contributed by each of their supplying locations. So might there be concerns with antibiotic residue in the fluid milk that is dried to make the milk powder? How is that being controlled? What are the processing steps that are done to manage the inherent hazards that could come in with the raw milk? Are those processing steps validated? Are they being implemented properly? Is there potential for allergen cross contact? Does this dry milk powder supplier also handle other kinds of allergens on the same equipment where the dry milk powder that we are sourcing is coming from? And then certainly considering things about the facility itself. Sometimes age can impact this. What is their hygienic zoning practice? Are there sanitation concerns at this facility? So all of that should be considered before that powder even touches your door. But then within your own cake mix plant, for example, if you were using this as an ingredient, you need to be concerned with the same sorts of facility considerations that we talked about with the supplier. Things like age. What is your hygienic zoning like? What is your sanitation? How is your facility maintained and repaired and kept up? Again, just some thought starters to get us thinking about the kinds of things that we would need to be thinking about. Next slide, please. So in a graphic form, we need to start with identifying whatever inherent hazards that might be present in that particular ingredient. Think about what's going on in the supplier's facility itself and what hazards could be introduced there. And then certainly rolling this up into the facility where this ingredient, the dry mix, is being used, or the dry powder is being used in the cake mix. to ensure that there aren't hazards being introduced there as well. Next slide, please. So really, this just repeats the same thing that we need to be concerned about all of these areas to make sure that we are doing a proper risk assessment to identify what hazards are inherent and can be contaminating a product like a dry milk powder to ensure that we are controlling them appropriately. Next slide, please. So really, we've come to the end of the official remarks. I think the key is that I want to leave you with keeping your eyes open, being aware of regulatory actions, and we've looked through a couple different sources of warning letters and recall advice. Um, what we may be hearing about regulators as far as what their focus may be. Be aware of who is being impacted out there, the types of impacts that are occurring. And certainly, if any of you have experienced regulatory actions in any of these areas, make sure that you have addressed those completely. Um, the key is to learn from the past, see how that might impact things in the future, and then, of course, apply these learnings appropriately so that we can all be better assured of a safe food supply. And that,
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. We do have some questions coming in. Again, if you have questions, please drop them in the Q&A section or the chat. We'll capture them and we'll ask Ruth the questions. The first question that we had come in, Ruth, how do you see FSMA expectations evolving around digital record keeping? Are spreadsheets still considered acceptable, or is the industry moving towards mandatory system integrations?
I don't personally, I don't see a mandate that all records must be digital. Because I think the reality is there's such a wide range of facilities out there at different maturity levels, maybe on the electronic record continuum. Um, I think most important is that however the format is of the records, that they be accurate, non-tamperable, so that they are reflecting what did happen, and able to be retrieved and reviewed and tracked and verified and all of that, which can be done manually. It certainly, depending on the complexity of the facility, could be more cumbersome. But in a relatively simple facility, it may not be that bad of a technique to be done. And I think there's recognition that that is certainly a valid way that could be used. However, given the complexities of our food supply and the the beauty of a quote simple facility probably is less likely today, although not not never out there. Um, Having the ability to use electronic tools to help with some of those activities can certainly aid in those decisions and all.
Okay. Another question that I had while listening to your session is, how do facilities balance the controlling the environmental pathogens while also maintaining the production speed, especially in high throughput operations?
Yeah. I guess I don't have a magic answer to this other than they just have to do it. I think attention towards hygienic zoning, even when lines are moving much more quickly, perhaps than they did before, and ensuring that they can keep um, separation through physical boundaries, walls and guards on equipment and things like that. Um, Separating employees and keeping uh, folks somewhat segregated so that there are folks who work on the finished product side who are not working also on the raw material, kind of raw side of the facility. That kind of goes without saying. And even with high speed lines, I think it can be done effectively, but um, attention needs to be paid to that. And I think it's all around hygienic zoning.
Okay. That's really helpful. For you mentioned in there around there would be more around the low moisture foods, right? So for dry or low moisture foods, how do you determine when an environmental pathogen program is necessary or what the organisms we should be targeting?
Yeah, well, some of it is just from what we know from, unfortunately, some previous issues that have occurred. There also is guidance out there from the regulators. FDA has stated in their guidance that they would consider salmonella to be a hazard in a low moisture food uh, production environment for the general population, and then extend that to include Chronobacter for infant formula. So those would be the organisms of concern, um, at least to start with. Depending on what the history might be, or um, what broader concerns might be, there might be consideration of something like Listeria monocytogenes, although I would prioritize the others on top of that.
All right. Any other questions? Oh wait, I think we had one come in. Okay. Uh, if pesticides are identified as a chemical hazard for the ingredients we're using, what preventative measures should we put in place for the ingredients? Testing every lot would be too costly and not realistic. What would be considered best practice in this situation?
That's a really good question. And I think this gets to the relationship that you should have with your suppliers on this, which could go back as far as the grower of a particular kind of crop, where we would be concerned about pesticides primarily. So having a really keen understanding of the pesticide management practices by those growers and farmers out there. Are they aware of what they are permitted to use? Are they using them appropriately? Do they have the right skills and training? Are they using and sourcing their pesticides, from reputable suppliers? And this may get back a couple layers in your receiving. So you may receive in a somewhat processed kind of produce from someone who might have cut it up or frozen it or something like that. But still, that produce originated in a field or on a tree somewhere. What's known about those practices, and it may be that your supplier, again, the processor of those fruits and vegetables, would have that information and would have done those checks and assurances essentially for you. So delving into that and poking at the strength of their programs to make sure that they are asking the right questions and have the right controls. I would agree, testing every lot can be burdensome and costly, but certainly perhaps periodic verification sampling would be a way to just ensure that those practices are being put in place. But it would really depend on the particular situation, where whether there's been a history of issues, et cetera.
All right. Well, thank you so much again, Ruth, for your time, your experience, and expertise in answering our questions. Uh, let's start wrapping this up a little bit. So, I want to remind everyone about our food and beverage manufacturing benchmark survey and report. It gives us a lot of insights that we like to share out with the space and industry. The other piece is you could win $500, right? And so that's pretty nice. I want to make sure that you're aware of some of the upcoming FSMA Friday events that we have coming on. I'm really excited, to welcome Dr. Ben Miller back to the stage and how traceable are your products really? And he's also bringing a special guest, Eric Marshall, with Levitt Partners, who they'll both kind of dive in and discuss some of the things there. And then in January, we're really lucky to have Dr. David Atchison. He'll be kind of sharing just a look back on 25 and then some of the predictions that he has around 26. And so we're slating and putting a lot of these things up in advance. You can find a lot of these resources on the Safety Chain website. We have guides. You can see more of the FSMA Friday webinars. You can find past webinars on there as well. There's videos, success stories, and solutions and consultants as well. And also check out the Atchison Group site. They also have a lot of great content and webinars and things that they're also putting on as well. And so from here, this is the end of the formal webinar and session. What we'll do now is jump to where our solution consultant, Ian, will actually demo how Safety Chain ties into some of the things that Ruth went over today. And I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you so much, Ruth. Great insights shared today, as always. I think particularly interesting around the GMP findings, undeclared allergen control, and labeling mistakes, showing how super small verification steps can make or break compliance in your plant. Most issues are not complex. They're small things that are breaking down or failing because a label wasn't checked, an allergen wasn't confirmed, or a paper form is not capturing what QA really needs. And hello, everyone. I'm Ian Hildebrandt, a solution consultant with Safety Chain. Today, I'm going to show you how you can address the exact risks Ruth talked about, using something you're already doing today, and that's startup checks and first piece verifications. It's a really small but high impact change you can do almost instantly. So I'll show you what we see at facilities using paper. I'll show you what a process looks like digitally for startup checks and first piece verifications, and then I'll show you how it's done in Safety Chain. Should be a great look into what could be possible at your plant. So I will first start off by showing you what a lot of you are familiar with, and this is the starting point for a lot of teams: paper forms for startup checks, or just paper forms in general across the plant. But let's talk about label verification and allergen confirmation on that first piece. So we've got handwritten notes, which are hard to read. We've got a little bit of risk of pencil whipping as always, and you don't have real-time visibility. The form itself isn't preventing anything, and it cannot stop the wrong label from getting onto the line. And on the right-hand side here, this is what the QA team is dealing with. We've got binders full of paper. We've got a forklift to lift this pallet. So you know we've got a lot of weight behind those paper forms. And overall, we just have a process that is forcing our team to be reactive instead of preventative. And we can change this by making the process digital. So in a digital workflow, operators are going to follow a guided sequence that mirrors your SOP. So they're adding a photo of the date code. They're adding a photo of the label, packaging, and they're scanning the UPC. We're also getting our weights, we're getting our leaker checks done, and then we instantly have visibility for every single person in the plant or at the company. So we have a lot of control. If something is wrong, the system is going to alert individuals right away. We're going to prevent startup related errors, and our Safety Chain customers find this to be true. In a lot of cases, they eliminate startup related errors, mislabels, wrong packaging, undeclared allergens, almost completely eliminated from their process. So we've got real-time visibility, no binder diving, no waiting for paperwork, and no guessing. So why take action on this one? Well, we know these are already happening every day on every line. So we tighten this step immediately and reduce some big risks without changing how the plant runs. The digital checks are ensuring that we're getting the right product and into the right packaging at the start of every run, no mislabeling, prevent undeclared allergens, capture our proof with photos, barcodes, timestamps, and give QA real-time visibility before the first case even runs. So the next thing I'll show you is what you've all been waiting for, and that is, how does this look in real life in safety chain? Well, you are seeing my tablet, and this is the one task I have for me to do today. So instead of an operator going to the line with a stack of paper, filling out his paper, recording the information that he or she always does, now you have a tablet that is going to guide your workflow. So I have my operational startup on line 4. This will follow my SOP and guide the user how to complete it. So the first thing we'll do is record the lot number. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is a very popular one today. We've got our date code that we'll enter. So we're in March, we're doing March 23rd, 2026. And let's capture a picture of the date code. This is a step in our process that we implemented because we want to ensure we're not printing the wrong date codes, because it's happened a few times recently. So this is just an additional verification step, nice and easy. Let's also just snag the UPC with a quick barcode scan. Very quick and easy and painless. Let's take a picture of the product as well, just to ensure that we've got the correct information. And I'm filling this out real time here with you so you can get a full picture of the process. So then the next thing I'm guided to do is get my target weights, check my leakers, and take 3 weight readings. So this is guiding the operator and capturing the correct information that we need to ensure that the plant is running smoothly. So that submits, and on my task screen, I've got none left right now. So I'll get the line running, and I will get back to my standard workflows and ensure that the line is up and running efficiently. So no interruptions to my day, and I'll wait for my next task here on the tablet. So that is the data collection on the shop floor where the work is being done. In addition, we have the ability to view this similar to what you saw on the slides a moment ago from a manager or supervisor level. So for our safety chain customers, this will look very familiar. Our records grid or our news feed are very popular, one of the most used functions of the platform. So this is a real-time view of data flowing in from the shop floor. And you can see the record that was just submitted by Ian Hildebrandt at the Appleton facility for our ops startup form. We've got the pictures verifying the date code. We have a picture of the product. Now, this is a fully auditable record that I can view instantly, also drill into for more information. As a supervisor, I am required to verify all the information is correct and that we can start up. So with a few clicks, I can sign off on this, add any additional comments I need, and sign this form so that ops can get up and running. And I've created a digital sign-off that you'll always see and can search on. So having this information real-time flowing into Safety Chain allows our customers to be in control of their process. So eliminating high-risk events that Ruth talked about. So undeclared allergens, mislabels, wrong packaging are still 1/3 of all reported incidents. I also have extensive capabilities to report on any of the data collected. So my lot number, I will always be able to trace this in the system and look at any data corresponding to that specific lot number. So lot number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, even just recently, I've collected a lot of information on it, and I can see all my lot numbers, all the products that have been running just with a click of a button. These simple things are what a lot of our safety chain customers take advantage of on day one. And it's something that even if you're using safety chain and haven't implemented, this is a small, simple fix to address some of the most common high-risk things for our food manufacturing plants. Now, if you're interested in learning more and are not a safety chain customer, get in touch and we can understand how your plant runs and where your biggest problems are and see if we're a fit. Thank you for attending the webinar today. Look forward to seeing you next month. And as always, thank you for attending.
All right. Well, this concludes the end of today's FSMA webinar. We want to thank everyone for attending, and hopefully we'll see you again in December. Bye.